Hey, what's up guys? Hello from Footballtalk here. These last few weeks we've talked about breakout NFL players, most improved position groups over the offseason, and then last week we got back into the rankings, talking about the top 10 offensive lines of football. Now I want to shift my focus towards less heralded players who aren't necessarily in a position where they are locked in as long-term contributors for their respective teams and are kind of entering a crucial season for their careers. That can be young players not really living up to their draft status yet, guys in a contract year wanting to earn another lucrative deal, or long-term veterans trying to stick around in the league. I call this a make-or-break season for these players because they're not at a point where people recognize them as some of the best in the league, so you won't really see any players on the franchise tag trying to earn that long-term contract for big money, but rather guys who could also be labeled as draft busts or washed-up veterans. It's kind of funny because usually I try to end up on an even number of players that I talk about, but somehow this list ended at 13 players, and I thought this was kind of fitting because for some people it's a lucky number, for others it's an unlucky number, and I thought for this category it just made sense. So let's get into the list, and we're going to start out with the quarterback, MITCH TRUBISKY of the Chicago Bears. Probably the most obvious pick here. Back in the 2017 NFL Draft, the 49ers kind of tricked the Bears to give them 2 third-round picks and a 4th rounder just to move up 1 spot at number 2 overall, where they would select the quarterback out of North Carolina. Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson were famously picked later on in the 1st round, and Trubisky will forever be linked to those guys. Unfortunately, unlike those other 2 stars, who to me are both top 5 quarterbacks in the league already, Trubisky recently saw his 50 option declined, and now is in competition with Nick Foles for the starting job. And for Foles, he might know that Matt Nagy offense better than all the other quarterbacks they've had in Chicago recently, just because of the time he spent with Nagy as his offensive coordinator in Kansas City. So for Trubisky, this might be over before the season even starts, if Foles ends up winning the job and not giving it up again. However, even if Trubisky wins the competition, he'll constantly have somebody looking over his shoulder and the fans putting pressure on him. But at the same time, if Trubisky doesn't win the competition, with Foles' injury history and the fact he hasn't started double-digit games since 2015, there's still a chance he can win the hearts of Bears fans back if he comes in late and takes this game to the playoffs, sort of in the mold what Foles did in his career a couple times already with Philadelphia. For Trubisky, his accuracy and decision-making are still way up and down for me, but he has plenty of arm talent and he's one of the better runners in the league off scrambles. I think the pieces are all pretty much there, with David Montgomery coming into his 2nd season. I expect him to be kind of a workhorse back for them. Recently talked about him as one of my breakout players. And then Allen Robinson, one of the better receivers nobody ever really talks about. Plus then Anthony Miller. He should take another step as well, as a guy who can get the ball too quickly and let him go to work. And then they have like 100 tight ends on the roster. Most notably, 2nd round pick Cole Kmet out of Notre Dame. Very solid all-around prospect. And then Jimmy Graham, who should at least be a weapon in the red zone. So that entire group should finally start to produce as well. And with Nagy's offense, what he wants to do is manipulate defenses with certain personnel sets and moving those pieces around. So finally having those pieces will be a big plus. And if Chicago's defense can return to the 2018 form, when they were leading the league in takeaways and Khalil Mack was wreaking havoc, that would definitely take pressure off the quarterback. And with Trubisky, if he can just do his thing, which is take advantage of easy opportunities, keep drives going with crucial scrambles and converting on some drives, his career could still go a completely different way. Next up, from the division rival Lions, I have JARRAD Davis, and linebacker is usually a very tough projection to the NFL, simply because in some conferences with the run fits, with all that slanting and twisting up front and the linebackers kind of just cleaning up the mess behind it, plus that in coverage, most coaches don't really give them man coverage or matchup zone things to do, but rather they're just spot dropping and simply taking away the underneath areas of the field. But Davis is a guy a lot of people got Ray Lewis vibes from coming out of Florida, just because of his ability to run sideline to sideline and the thump he brought as a hitter. I thought Davis had a pretty promising rookie campaign, but since then he's just been banged up and not really playing well. He recently saw his 50 option declined, and the Detroit front office has invested a lot into the linebacker position. Last year they spent a 2nd round pick on Jelani Tawai coming out of Hawaii, and then they signed Jamie Collins to a big deal in free agency this offseason, plus later on they brought in former Chief Reggie Ragland as well. You look at the linebackers for Detroit last season, Devon Kennard easily led them in snaps as the starting jack, which is kind of what I believe Collins will be for them as a hybrid player. Christian Jones, he played every spot for them last season, after being mostly limited to playing Will before that. That penciled Davis in as the Mike, but now with the presence of Tavai, he was moved more to the weak side or subbed out altogether at times. You can throw Jalen Reeves-Maybin into the mix as well as a rangy player for sub packages, and with all those pieces, it'll be interesting how they put it all together. But the one thing I do know, there are plenty of bodies now to take away snaps from Davis, especially if they're looking at him as a 2-down run plug-in Mike, which is kind of a dying breed in the NFL anyway. But they now have Ragland who can absolutely replace that, and he's played that role much better these last couple of seasons. Even if the Lions decide to move on from Davis next offseason, if he can play well this year and then get signed to a team to be a starter, he can stick around for a while now. But this is just one of those things where you have a disappointing former high draft pick who's a familiar candidate on the injury report that might be forgotten about and out of the league possibly soon. Davis still has a lot of talent, but I've just seen it happen too many times to think this is out of the realm of possibility. So the young linebacker needs to prove he can be a difference maker in the middle of a defense and stay on the field if he wants to stick around. Next up we have Jalen Mills, defensive back for the Eagles. He was originally a 7th round pick for Philadelphia in 2016, and he's become a real contributor for this team and someone that the fans can rally behind. Since his rookie year, he's played at least 90% of the snaps on defense when available at the corner position, but now he signed another 1-year prove-it deal for $4 million and is asked to make that switch to safety. After watching the All or Nothing series on the Eagles, the guy they call Green Goblin definitely brings a certain energy to this defense and the team overall, and the coaches seem to love him. He has plenty of ball production with 34 plays on the ball, including 4 picks, over the 32 games he's played in these last 3 seasons, and he was fairly dependable as a tackler, missing just 11 of those since 2018. With that being said, he did miss 15 games over his last 2 years, and still allowed almost 1,200 yards and 5 touchdowns over that stretch, while surrendering a passer rating north of 100 in both of them. At no point of his career did I even look at him as an average starter, and the numbers back me up here. Now bringing in Darius Slay as a true shutdown corner potentially, to go along with Avonte Maddox, Cindy Jones, Rasul Douglas, in addition to Nickel Roby-Coleman and 4th-year pick K'Von Wallace out of Clemson to compete for snaps in the slot, there just wasn't any room for Mills if he had stayed at corner. But for Philadelphia, all of a sudden losing Malcolm Jenkins in free agency to the Saints, that left a big hole at the strong safety position. I certainly don't believe that Mills can replace all the things Jenkins did for them, whether it was in deep coverage, dropping down into the slot, playing some dime linebacker, and basically doing everything other than bring home milk. But I think he can fill at least some role. Pairing him up with Rodney McLeod and allowing him to roam around more in the underneath areas, dropping into the flats, or acting as a robber with as much man coverage as Jim Schwartz will now want to run with an actual number 1 corner, it could help him out as a more physical player who doesn't mind sticking his face in the fan and taking ball carriers to the ground, rather than leaving him outside one-on-one with Amari Cooper and seeing him get roasted. However, Mills still has a lot of competition on that roster now. The Eagles signed a starting level player in my opinion in Will Parks, and then drafting Wallace as well, who could succeed in that role as long as he's not put in too many deep coverage responsibility. I thought that wasn't one of his strengths at Clemson, but for Mills, he could earn another contract if he's successful at making that transition, but at the same time, he could be expendable next offseason as well. Let's talk about another quarterback here, and Teddy Bridgewater, now for the Carolina Panthers. And let me start like this. Teddy B is a guy you just have to root for. He had that horrific leg injury with the Vikings, and is now finally earning a starting job again for the first time since 2015. He filled in very well for Drew Brees in New Orleans last season, going 5-0 in the starter, and earning a 3-year, $63 million deal in the process to go to the division rival Panthers. However, when I look at that contract, Carolina could easily get out of it after the 2021 season, making him a prime candidate to help groom a rookie quarterback that season if they end up picking early in next year's draft. I actually think Teddy's a great fit in that Joe Brady offense, just because it doesn't really need that big-armed gunslinger, but rather a guy who can deliver the ball accurately all over the field as the spread defense is out and attack certain matchups. He now has a trio of playmakers at the receiver position to go along with him. DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, and then signing Robbie Anderson as a free agent this offseason. Plus, he has the ultimate receiving weapon at the running back position, Christian McCaffrey, who in that offense will be used as a coverage indicator of motions and be heavily involved as a route runner because of what Joe Brady believes in with that 5-out system. So that group of skill position players is really everything that he needs around him. But with that being said, it kind of sickens me when people think it's all about the quarterbacks if a team wins or loses, and how great Teddy was last season. And like I said, he did well to steer the ship when Drew went out, but you also have to acknowledge how easy Sean Payton makes it on his quarterbacks by creating favorable matchups in the pass game, and how he kills defenses by setting up screenplays to go along with how much the Saints dominated up front on both sides of the ball. You look at the stats for Bridgewater, completing 68% of his passes for almost 1,400 yards, 9 TDs and just 2 picks. That looks great, but he also easily finished dead last in yards to the sticks, throwing the ball 3.3 yards short of the marker on average, and he averaged the lowest number of intended air yards as well. Now being in a similar offense under Joe Brady, it'll definitely help, but he's going from one of the elite offensive lines in football to one that might be in the bottom 5, and I just need to see how he will utilize all those vertical weapons, especially with Anderson being brought in as primarily a deep threat. I think at the end of the season, the numbers won't look bad, and now with Matt Rule coming in as the new head coach and going all in on defense in the draft, they could create some issues for opposing teams, but if they end up picking in the top 5, I think Teddy could be a place warmer the following season. Let's go back to defense, and we have a 13th overall pick here in HAASON REDDICK. This guy created a major hype train leading up to the 2017 draft, and I was one of many to actually jump on it. He was primarily an edge rusher at Temple, wearing one of those highly touted single-digit numbers, and he increased his production every single season, which was highlighted by his senior year with a mind-boggling 22.5 tackles for loss. After wrapping up his collegiate career, Reddick went down to the Senior Bowl, known as kind of an undersized edge rusher, but throughout the week, he blew everybody away with his ability to play off the ball, stick to backs and tight ends in man coverage, and still win as a pass rusher. He was a safety coming out of high school, and it really showed there. And then he had a combine to match that versatile athletic skill set he showcased, and he was regarded as a guy who could play off the ball linebacker for you on base downs, and then line up on the edge on third downs. Because of that, he shot up all the way from like a mid-round pick to a mid-first round pick. Through his first 3 years in the league, he's played every single game and multiple positions, and he's definitely had some flashes. But overall, he's been a big disappointment so far, I would think, for the Cardinals. After he failed to stick at inside backer, Reddick has been demoted to pretty much solely an edge rusher in nickel packages, and now with 8th overall pick, Isaiah Simmons coming in as a more freakish and versatile player even, to pair up with Jordan Hicks, who actually didn't miss a single snap last season and played at a near Pro Bowl level for them. That might not change anytime soon. Reddick obviously didn't see his 50 option picked up, and he will decide a lot of his future with his play in 2020. But the silver lining might be this. The Cardinals have now added a ton of space eaters in the middle of that defense over the last 2 drafts. And while they will run a lot of base because of the amount of 12 and 21 personnel the teams in the division want to run, having those big guys clogging up lanes on the inside could allow Reddick to be more aggressive with attacking upfield, and then leave Simmons behind him, quickly flowing laterally. Plus, since I expect the run defense to take a big step forward, opposing teams will be in more obvious passing situations. And a look at what the Cardinals have added, the only edge defender that they've really brought in is Devon Kennard, who should be used more as a Sam anyway, because of his ability to stop the run, and Reddick not really having the frame for it either way. If defensive coordinator Vance Joseph wants to use Simmons' versatility and deploy him as a big nickel on sub packages, for example, and then allow Reddick to be more of an off-ball blitzer on subsets at times, plus also rushing from a wide alignment, he could have a much more productive 2020 season. Let's look at a more seasoned veteran in Josh Norman, once a standout at Coastal Carolina and kind of a diamond in the rough as a 5th round pick for the nearby Panthers. Norman's rise and fall has been kind of unique. His rookie year, he ended up starting 12 games before missing all of his second season with an injury. In 2014, he did make a lot of plays on the ball, but he really took his game to another level the final year of his rookie deal, when he defended 22 passes and was involved in 9 total takeaways, which includes interceptions, fumbles forced and recovered, and he scored 2 touchdowns that season as well. The following offseason, the Panthers did something very uncommon, as they decided to rescind his franchise tag, making him a true free agent, and soon after that he signed a 5-year, $75 million contract with Washington, which was the highest of any corner at that point. In his first year in the nation's capital, he repeated those 22 plays on the ball, even if the turnovers went down a little. But since then, I think he's been in steep decline. So much so that at the end of last season, Washington decided to bench him in favor of some young guys on that roster, and he was released a few weeks later. This offseason, the Bills signed him to a 1-year, $6 million contract to kind of re-establish himself in the league. The challenges for a declining player with some athletic limitations at this point of his career are obvious. But Norman is only entering his 9th season as a pro, and he has some things going for himself. First and foremost, he will be back in the Panther-style, zone-heavy defensive scheme under Sean McDermott, who was Norman's defensive coordinator throughout his time in Carolina. And you look at the Buffalo defense, They have 2 rangy linebackers to limit yards after catch if Dormer gets beaten off the line for a quick in-breaking route. Then they have one of the more balanced safety tandems with Mike Hyde and Jordan Poyer, and an improving pass rush to not allow opposing quarterbacks to hold on to the ball. Maybe even more important, when the Bills do go to more man-heavy coverages, they have Tre'Davious White out there who can take the opposing team's best receiver. And then I think they also found maybe a new starting nickel in the 7th round of the draft with Dane Jackson out of Pitt. Not really a guy who people have a lot of expectations for, but I really like this feisty play in coverage. So now for Norman, 32 years old, he won't really be asked to travel with anybody. He has experience in zone coverage that will really help him out, and he'll see some favorable matchups when he's asked to play man. With all that being said, he still definitely has to step up his game if he wants to keep that starting job as a cornerback 2, because Levi Wallace played 75% of the snaps for them last season, and when last seen in Buffalo, EJ Gaines was a starter for them in 2017, and even the late round draft pick who I just talked about, he has plenty of experience playing on the outside in college at least. Next up we have James Conner, running back for the Steelers, and you look at his first 3 years in the league. As a rookie, he barely saw the field behind Le'Veon Bell, but when the starback decided to hold out over contract disputes in 2018, Conner really took advantage of the opportunity, putting together almost 1,500 yards and 13 touchdowns from scrimmage, despite missing 3 games. Last season, with Bell moving on to New York, Conner was in line for another big season, but with Ben Roethlisberger being put on IR after week 2, the offense just being stale altogether and the running back being banged up himself all year, missing another 6 games, it was a pretty disappointing campaign. And now Conner is entering the final year of his rookie deal after being a former 3rd round pick from nearby Pitt in 2017. And for him personally, first and foremost, he just needs to stay healthy if he wants to earn another long-term contract with Pittsburgh, who are known for building up homegrown players. The offense should definitely be more wide open, with Big Ben coming in to give them a legitimate passing game after what they had with their quarterbacks last season, to go along with Juju Smith-Schuster, he's back healthy, Deontay Johnson, one of my prime breakout candidates for 2020, who I talked about recently as well, James Washington definitely showing signs last season, and then Eric Ebron, he might be brought in as more of a big flex receiver. In the 2nd round of this year's draft, they also selected Notre Dame's Chase Claypool, who excels with the ball in the air and what he can do after the catch as a very physical player, kind of a limited route tree, but something that I thought about recently. He ran a lot of shallow crosses in Notre Dame, and with how well the Steelers set up their draw plays, maybe that is something that they take advantage of, sending on that crosser, taking the linebacker with him out of the box, and then a lot of room for Conner to work inside. That might be a play that they use quite a bit. As far as the Steelers' offensive line goes, they did lose a stalwart, the left guard in Ramon Foster, to retirement, but they're bringing back 4 or 5 starters, and the one spot that they have to replace, now bringing in a seasoned veteran in Stefan Wisniewski, that might not be a huge drop-off. So I believe Conner should definitely have more room to run inside or catching the ball underneath because of the receivers around him. But there are 2 major challenges for him to stay in Pittsburgh. First, they drafted another similar back last year in the 4th round with Benny Snell coming out of Kentucky, more of a banger as well. And then in the same round this April, they brought in Maryland's Anthony McFarland, who to me is more of a home run threat at the position. Plus, while he's more of a change of pace 3rd down back maybe, Jalen Samuels played very well for this team last season. So there's already a lot of competition for all those touches. And then you look at the Steelers' cap situation next offseason. Here are some of the free agents for them in 2021. Cam Hayward, Bud Dupree, the 2 starting offensive tackles, and Juju. Even if Ben decides to retire, and they now have that money to spend to go along with that, they likely won't be in position to draft a quarterback high next year, and they certainly don't have a long-term answer at that position on the roster already, when I look at what Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges did for them last season. If Pittsburgh needs to pay a quarterback in free agency next offseason, and they have to decide between one of their starting tackles or a young star receiver in Juju, and what could be labeled as an injury-prone running back, I don't see Conner getting that big-time contract, unless he decides to come back on a hometown discount or just doesn't really play well enough to demand any long-term money. There are just too many guys at his position already who can combine to fill that role basically for peanuts. So Conner might be in kind of a lose-lose situation in terms of his ability to stay in Pittsburgh. Going back to the defensive side of the ball, I want to look at AHKELLO Witherspoon, cornerback for the San Francisco 49ers. And I actually had him as one of my sleepers ahead of the 2017 NFL draft, just because of the length and athleticism he presented, coming out of Colorado, alongside with now Cowboy Chidobe Awuzie. But the Niners decided to spend a 3rd round pick on him and he really showed a lot of promise as a rookie. Started the final 8 games of the season and made 9 plays on the ball, including 2 picks. After seeing that and already kind of having a bias because of my evaluation of him coming out of college, I listed him as a potential breakout candidate heading into year 2 because of how well he fit in that single high cover 3 heavy scheme that they run in San Francisco to go along with bringing in Richard Sherman on the opposite side. But unfortunately, things have just gone downhill for him. These last 2 years, Witherspoon has allowed a combined 11 touchdowns in 22 games played, meaning he gave up 1 score every second game in this very easy equation, and he's intercepted just 1 pass over that stretch. While I wouldn't necessarily call it an unwillingness anymore, he definitely still has his issues as a tackler, and when teams know the Niners' tendencies, they will take advantage of Witherspoon, such as going to press man in 3rd and medium situations. In last year's divisional round game against the Vikings, a couple of plays that really stick out to me. Once he got completely off balance, trying to stay with Adam Thielen on like a stutter release to the inside on a slant route, and then a couple of plays later, Kirk Cousins just went after him on another deep ball to Stephon Diggs. Just struggles to play with his back to the quarterback and kind of face guarding receivers. After that second play, he was replaced by Emmanuel Moseley, which actually happened several times in 2019 because Moseley just was the much more consistent play in my opinion. For Witherspoon, the athletic capability and measurables are all still very intriguing. There's no doubt about that, but his technique and physicality need a lot of work as well. The 49ers can't put him in off coverage too much if they want him to succeed, and he needs to learn to stay more balanced as he guards receivers one-on-one or just read certain patterns. Richard Sherman is still playing very well in that system that mostly protects him from his deficiencies that come with age until Sammy Watkins blows by him in the Super Bowl, and then K'Wan Williams has established himself as a very dependable option at nickel. So there's really only one spot up for competition, and depending on how much confidence defensive coordinator Robert Saleh has in what still is a pretty young player, Witherspoon could still be in position to defend the starting job, but Mosley's right there with him, Dante Johnson's looking to re-establish himself in the Bay, and then they have that X factor who I've already referenced a couple of times in Jason Verrett. He was one of those rising young corners in the league just a couple of years ago, but just hasn't been on the field for them since that 2017 opener when he was still with the Chargers. For Witherspoon, he will have to prove a lot to this organization coming into the final year of his rookie deal, but the one bright spot for him, the Niners don't have a single corner of note under contract after this upcoming season. So if he plays well, I could definitely see the Niners retaining him. Next up on my list, I have quarterback Derek Carr, now of the Las Vegas Raiders. And unlike a lot of players on this list, who actually aren't part of my cover photo, Carr has at least played on an average level for several years now. He was originally selected early in the 2nd round of the 2014 draft, coming out of Fresno State, and he started all but 2 regular season games in his 6-year career. Despite the Raiders going 3-13 in his rookie campaign, I thought he showed a lot of great signs, and I can remember former Packer James Jones called the young signal caller a baby Aaron Rodgers. While I wouldn't have put him on the same level talent-wise, and Rodgers at that point was playing at a level far beyond everybody else in the league, I saw the ability to make any throw and create off-script similar to the MVP in Green Bay back then. Carr took the next step in his 2nd season when in 4 of the 7 games that they actually won, he had to bring them back in the 4th quarter, and then in year 3 is when Carr really put a stamp on the NFL. He completed 64% of his passes for almost 4,000 yards, 28 touchdowns compared to only 6 picks, and he led 7 game-winning drives. The quarterback had the Raiders at 12-3 in position for a 1st-round bye until he broke his fibula late in Week 15, which cost them the final game and forced them to travel to Houston for a wildcard game with the 3rd-string quarterback. But that season, he was one of the MVP frontrunners. The following year, the Silver and Black only won half as many games, and Carr's numbers dropped pretty dramatically. In the first year under John Gruden, the team went 4-12, and then last season they started out 6-4 before losing all but one of their final 6 games, even though the quarterback completed a career-high 70.4% of his passes. So if you consider all of that, you could argue that Carr hasn't played bad at all, and there have certainly been some other factors for the lack of success as a team, including trading away the best player in Khalil Mack, not always surrounding the quarterback with the best weapons once they sent Amari Cooper to Dallas in 2018, and just that transition to a fairly young roster now with so much draft capital they had collected. With that being said, I've never really gotten the feeling that Gruden is all in on his current signal caller, and there are no excuses for Carr coming into the season. He has what I think is a top 5 offensive line. He has what I think will be a top 5 offensive line, a star 2nd-year back in Josh Jacobs, 3 receivers being brought in via the draft, and a very talented tight end room. Last season, CARR averaged only 6.3 air yards per attempt, and he threw the ball 2.3 yards short of the sticks on average, which are both bottom 3 marks in the NFL, despite being in the top half of the league in terms of times in the pocket. And that certainly has a lot to do with that Gruden offense being built on short passes to force the defense to come upfield and then hit them with throws over the top. But so many times I saw CARR having somebody open downfield and just being hesitant to pull the trigger, or routinely throwing the ball short of the marker on third downs. This organization isn't paying Marcus Mariota $17.6 million over these next 2 seasons if they weren't comfortable with actually playing him potentially. And their head coach has made it very clear in years prior how much he likes Mariota. A fairly young quarterback himself, to me, hasn't really improved in terms of his pocket presence or ability to come with his primary receivers since coming into the league, but that's a different topic for another day. So I would not be shocked that if the Raiders start out slow, they make that switch mid-season. CARR is still only 29 years old, and there's probably a couple other teams out there that would definitely like to pay him, but that 17-31 record since signing his big extension just hasn't been good enough. Let's go back to defense now with Vic Beasley, edge rusher who recently signed with the Titans. If you followed this guy's journey since he became a starter at Clemson and asked anybody after his second season in the league, I don't think one person would have thought he would be on this list 3 years later. Beasley came out of college with 30 career sacks and 48 tackles for loss, and he blew everybody away at the 2015 Combine. That led to the Falcons drafting him 8th overall, and while he didn't just go off as a rookie, he did start all 16 games right away. The following season, he led the league with 15.5 sacks and 6 forced fumbles, while also scoring a touchdown on the way. Unfortunately, from that point on, he hasn't resembled that type of player these last 3 years, with 5, 5, and 8 sacks respectively, to go along with 3 combined fumbles forced over that stretch. His exit from Atlanta was kinda ugly as well. They announced on their official Twitter account that they wouldn't pursue any negotiations with the former top 10 pick, but Beasley is only turning 28 this week, and he should get a chance to prove doubters wrong in Tennessee this upcoming season. The Titans decided to bring him in for $9.5 million for this 1 year and pair him up with another young edge rusher in Harold Landry, who doubled his sack output from his rookie campaign with 9 last season and is a rising player himself. Unlike some other guys on this list who might be afterthoughts because of the stage of their career they are in, or were added to a position group where they still have to earn those opportunities, to give Beasley that kind of money and not sign anybody else at that spot, it indicates he will be given a chance to make plays for this team. Especially since a lot of people would have said the pass rush was their biggest area of improvements though. Now that Dean Pease seems to have finally actually retired, the defensive coordinator position in Tennessee is vacant, and they don't plan on bringing anybody else in either. Mike Vrabel did add Jim Hassett as their inside linebacker coach, who has plenty of experience as a coordinator, and he might be calling plays once September rolls around, but according to the head coach, they're going to pretty much do what they have done so far. That means running a hybrid 3-4 base front with a lot of personnel rotation, multitude of coverages, and creative pressure looks. When you look at the struggles Beasley has had with consistency, a lot of that has been about switching between defensive end and Sam linebacker for the Falcons. I would expect the Titans to run a lot of nickel with Jeffrey Simmons, who I think has sky-high potential, lining up next to one of those space eaters on the interior, to go with Landry and Beasley on the edges. The Titans use their inside backers in those blitz packages a whole lot, put them in the A-gaps pre-snap to create a lot of one-on-one pass rush situations, and then either drop them out or bring them as well on rushes, and then they drop the edge rushers back at times to cover the hook areas and get easy pass deflections. So I think Beasley is definitely in a situation where he can succeed. Let's move on to the guy who will probably line up across from him week 1 next season, with the Broncos' Garrett Bowles. When I was going through the rosters of all 32 NFL teams, I found myself raving over this Denver squad over and over again, whether it's about the weapons they have surrounded the second-year quarterback Drew Lock with, or making those key under-the-radar signings on defense. And that also includes the offensive line, where I think they will take a big step forward with the additions of Graham Glasgow in free agency, and then third-round pick Lloyd Cushenberry out of LSU to strengthen that interior. They also get back last year's big free agent signing in Jawan James at right tackle. So now the only spot that I'm not really sold on, and the Broncos seemingly aren't either long-term, is left tackle. Garrett Bowles is a former top 20 pick who recently saw his 50 option declined, despite playing a premium position and nobody else really on that roster who I'd expect to become a future starter. Coming out of Utah with just 1 year of experience playing college ball, what really stood out about Bowles was that nasty streak he displayed as a run blocker and the athleticism to put hands on people in space, as well as recovering in his pass sets. Unfortunately, he just hasn't been able to clean up his technique and protection yet, showing balance issues, being off with some hand placement stuff, and just keeping well-coordinated footwork overall. Bolles has been responsible for 15.5 sacks over his 3 years with Denver, and he was flagged 17 times last season, which ranked second among all NFL players. And counting declined penalties as well, that included 13 holding calls alone. The good news here, only 2 of them came in the final 6 weeks of the season, and I thought he looked a lot better once the Broncos didn't have a statue back there like Joe Flacco as Drew Lock was inserted into the starting lineup. But people within that organization have made it very clear that this just isn't acceptable. For all the pieces that Denver has put together, having that reliable presence on the blind side will be a huge factor for this team trying to make a big jump in 2020. For Bolles specifically, it's not necessarily about somebody behind him threatening him for the starting job, because as long as the flags don't continue to fly as much as they have done, I don't think Jake Rogers will take over anytime soon. Instead, Bolles just has to prove to the front alphas and their coaching staff that he's the guy for them to man that spot beyond this season. For the Broncos, now having the premier offensive line coach in the NFL and Mike Munchak, now that Dante Scarnecchia has finally retired, it'll be a big help for this young group. But if Bolles doesn't make some strides, no other team will look at him to give him a serious starter contract next offseason. The final defensive player on my list here, XAVIER Rhodes, now with the Indianapolis Colts. And it's kind of crazy to have this guy on the list, because he was just a first-team All-Pro in 2017 and earned a 5-year, $70 million contract because of it. For cornerbacks, the cliff usually comes quite quickly, but this is one of the extreme cases where you have a guy who was referred to as a shutdown corner just a couple of years ago, and now you look at it, there were over 100 players at his position that were ranked ahead of him in Pro Football Focus's metrics. Just to put this into some perspective, among the 87 corners that saw at least 50 targets their way last season, Rhodes allowed the highest completion percentage, which was around 80% according to multiple sources, and he's surrendered a passer rating north of 120. I'm not 100% sure if he wasn't hurt or we just didn't know about it, but his athleticism seemed to have dropped up dramatically, and he looked like he wouldn't be even able to run sub 5 seconds if you put him in a 40-yard dash right now. The good thing for Rhodes here, he won't be looked at Indy's #1 corner, since they have Rocky Singh entering his second season as a pro, and I expect him to take that next step as well, which I recently discussed in my analysis of the biggest defensive breakout candidates for 2020. And the coaching staff may just look at Rhodes as a veteran presence to help the young guys out. Indianapolis also has a very good nickel in Kenny Moore, and a young trio of safeties that could all play major snaps. But in the end, for Rhodes, it will be about contributing on the field if he wants to stick around in the league. And to do so, he really needs to step up his game. There aren't a bunch of talented corners on that roster otherwise who will be given the benefit of the doubt just to gain experience. But TJ Carey is still there, who is a 6-year veteran himself, and outside of a couple of games last season, certainly didn't play bad for the Browns. In that zone-heavy scheme for Indy, where they give a lot of too high safety looks and don't really put their corners on islands, Rhodes' resume will probably give him the nod for week 1, and he might not be exposed to where he needs to be put on the bench. But from what I saw last season, there's just little to be excited about. With that being said, considering this looked like one of the bigger drop-offs for any player I've seen in some time, maybe we'll see him closer to that form from a couple of years ago if he actually just was banged up and can take that step back up again. And the last player on the list, TYROD Taylor, quarterback for the LA Chargers. And similar to Derek Carr, I feel like I kind of have to refresh people's minds on the journey of TYROD. Despite being the reigning ACC Player of the Year at Virginia Tech, he was only a 6th-round pick and had to back up Joe Flacco in Baltimore for 4 years. In 2015, then Bills head coach Rex Ryan brought Taylor in, and he beat out former first-round pick E.J. Manuel and Matt Castle before being what I think was an above-average starter in Buffalo for 3 years. In his final season there, Sean McDermott decided to make the switch to then rookie Nathan Peterman, which obviously was a huge mistake in that one game against the Chargers, when he turned the ball over 5 times in the first half alone. After that, Taylor was put back under center, and he led the team to the first playoff appearance in almost 20 years, and they nearly beat the Jaguars in the wildcard round, who themselves barely missed the trip to the Super Bowl. But a couple of months later, the Bills decided to trade Taylor to Cleveland for a 3rd-round pick, and he actually started the year out ahead of first overall pick Baker Mayfield originally. But Baker would go on to replace the veteran in the middle of a Week 3 Thursday night game against the Jets, and he never looked back. Last offseason, Taylor signed a 2-year deal with the Chargers to back up Phillip Rivers, but now that the organization has cut ties with the 16-year veteran, Taylor has been talked up as their starting quarterback for 2020. The pieces definitely seem to all be there. You have Keenan Allen, a really crafty receiver in the slot, that big body jump ball specialist in Mike Williams, one of the more talented tight ends in the league when healthy in Hunter Henry, and one of the premier receiving backs in the league in Austin Eckler. who actually made Rivers' numbers look a lot better because of what he did after the catch on simple checkdowns or getting involved as a downfield receiver as well. To go along with that, I think the Chargers will have one of the elite defenses in football, and outside of left tackle, they now have the best offensive line they have had in years. With all that being said, when your team selects a quarterback 6th overall, like the Chargers did with Oregon's Justin Herbert, that veteran quarterback will have to take advantage of a great roster if he doesn't want to just be a placeholder until the rookie's ready. In my evaluations of Herbert, I came to the conclusion that despite being pretty much a 4-year starter, he still has a lot of work to do when it comes to being an anticipatory thrower, adjusting to the defense's post-snap, and he was kind of a deer in the headlights at times in big games for the Ducks. However, he certainly has more arm talent and is a more dangerous runner than TYROD, who to me has to show the ability to keep his eyes downfield while negotiating the rush from within the pocket and just be willing to push the ball down the field. When I think back to that Jets game that I already referenced, where Baker replaced him in the second half, he actually got hurt because he took so many sacks, just taking his eyes down, trying to run around inside the pocket, and not really seeing what's happening down the field. Even if Herbert is the long-term solution for the Bolts, Taylor could keep his job for all of 2020 and then earn a starting gig elsewhere in 21 if he just plays well. Alright, let's get to a couple other guys I considered here. Baker Mayfield, kind of obvious, very strong rookie campaign as a 1st overall pick. Super talented roster around him and couldn't really take advantage of it last season. A lot of that can be put on a rookie head coach as well, but I think this year, with Ken Stefanski coming in, that system that he should really benefit from, he has to play well because the credits are certainly all there already. And then he has Case Keenum behind him, who may not be necessarily a huge threat right away, but if he continues to be inconsistent, the coaches won't be afraid to throw him out there for a game or two. Next up, Ronald Jones, running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Had some awesome tape at USC just a couple of years ago, but hasn't really looked like the same player in the NFL, not nearly as dynamic, making people miss and creating those big plays. With the Bucs also drafting Keyshawn Vaughn in the 3rd round, and Jones not really showing much in the passing game to go along with Brady now. Didn't have a bad 2019 season, but hasn't lived up to his potential yet. In a similar way, Rashad Penny of the Seahawks, he just hasn't been able to beat out Chris Carson, has been banged up quite a bit, has definitely shown some flashes, but needs to put it all together as well this season, with another back on the roster as well to go along. John Ross, wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals, former top 10 pick, mostly because he broke the combine record for the 40-yard dash probably, but definitely very intriguing coming out of Washington a couple of years ago as well. Same thing, just hasn't been healthy, drop issues, and in that offense with a lot of weapons actually around Joe Burrow now, he better put up some numbers. Then you have Austin Corbett, former early 2nd round pick for the Browns. Now he's with the Rams. Played tackle in college, but I thought he best projected the center. Now in his 2nd team, filled multiple spots, just hasn't been able to focus on one job. And with the Rams, they have a lot of young, promising players, but nobody has really established himself. So it'll be interesting if he can do that, probably as a guard this season. Randy Gregory for the Cowboys, obvious one here as well, just hasn't been able to stay in the league even because of the stuff he has done off the field. But once a very talented player at Nebraska, brought his off-field issues right away into the league, and even when he was on the field, hasn't been able to put it all together consistently. But between him and Alden Smith, cross from DeMarcus Lawrence, it'll be interesting how they split those snaps, and if he can be an impact player for them in the passing game. Breland Speaks, somebody most people don't really know about, but he was a former top 50 pick for the Chiefs, played some as a rookie, then missed all of last season, and while he might not have great pressure on him, but the other guys they have on the inside for the Chiefs, with young guys like Derek Nardi, Keelan Saunders, and Chris Jones of course, I'm not quite sure how he fits into the mix, and his most famous play probably was that missed tackle on John Brady 2 years ago in a big regular season game, when he just let him go basically because he was afraid that he would get flagged because of how strict the refs were with hitting the quarterback that season. Then you have Reuben Foster, super talented player coming out of Alabama a few years ago. Actually was one of 2 first-round picks for the 49ers to go along with Solomon Thomas, who you could definitely put on this list as well. Showed great signs early on, but that got hurt. Then there were these off-field accusations, which to my knowledge are gone now. But then last off-season training camp, he completely blows up his knee. We just don't know what we'll get from him. But once a very talented player and like a top 10 prospect for me. Kevin King, the corner for the Packers. Another guy with a lot of potential because of the length and athleticism he presented coming out of Washington. But the Packers are probably not completely sold on him either, as that second corner to go along with Jair Alexander. Very inconsistent play, even though he can make those splash plays as well. Vernon Hargraves, a former top 10 pick, I believe, for the Bucs. Similar story to a lot of other guys on this list. Injuries and inconsistent play. Had some solid stretches as a nickel, but is now with the Texans, who also in the forefront of the draft brought in John Reed from Penn State, who is another guy I like a lot. So I'm not even sure if he'll beat out him as the starting nickel. So that'll probably make him like a 4th or 5th corner for that team. And finally, Marcus May for the Jets. Missed most of his second season with an injury. Has not been a bad player, but with all that Jamal Adams stuff going on, you don't know if they will even keep him. And then the third one of this year's draft, bringing in Ashton Davis, who might play corner or nickel early on in his career, but ultimately should make that transition to free safety where May is actually. So let's see if they want to pay him next offseason after being a 2nd round pick. A lot of things still up in the air. Some other guys I thought about here, some of those young Falcons defenders who really struggled last season, New England skill position players, Sony Michel and N'Keal Harry, and then some guys for Jacksonville like Taven Bryan is a former 1st round pick trying to finally make that jump, and Tyler Eifert who hasn't been healthy for several years now. But that is it. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, or check out my page helloswithfootballtalk.com and follow me on my social media, which you can all find linked down below. I will probably be back 2 weeks from now, since I have a few days off coming up, but don't worry, I'm already working on my list of the top 10 triplets in the NFL, meaning quarterback, running back, and wide receiver, since I saw some of those lists a while ago and heavily disagreed with them when I was working through all the NFL rosters. I also already noted some of the more interesting position battles heading into training camp, which should be 3 weeks from now if everything stays on schedule. And then we'll get to a little bit of fantasy season, late round diamonds, some guys whose ADP I just don't really get. So I got a lot of content coming up, and in the meantime, you can check out some of the breakdowns I've already put together this offseason, or maybe even go back to my draft evaluations to read up on some of your favorite team's rookies. So until then, see you later. Peace.